So now we're going to go into part 4 of why America was never a Christian nation. And you're going to hear the penalty given to two groups of people. And I want you to think about why that was the case. Why that was truly the case.
Were summarily arrested and then executed. And so it was suppressed. But what this made clear to members of the House of Burgesses and to the Parliament in London is that what was created in Jamestown could not be duplicated in other colonies, and it needed to be redirected within Jamestown, Virginia, and throughout Virginia. And that is, they had created a powder keg of a community of people that were class-oriented. So white and black.
Now remember, I told you America was built by two forms of labor, cheap and cheapest. You're about to discover how true that is.
People, for the first 3 to 4 generations in Virginia, they slept together, they ate together, they had families together, they got drunk together, they ate together. They saw each other as the same people with the same problems and common interests and common enemies.
Now, where have we heard this before? Where have we heard this before? Let me enlighten you.
Is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, in the colonies, the colonial elite, looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants, who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up, and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another, or they're going to rise up and take our stuff. Right?
Now, how is America a Christian nation? Already, you're cheating your brother. You're misusing him. You're lying to him. You're giving him faulty business deals. You're creating division. You're intentionally implementing hatred. How is that a Christian nation? You can go right here to finish listening to the rest of his speech, his lecture. But let's get back to Bacon's Rebellion.
First 3 to 4 generations in Virginia, they slept together, they ate together, they had families together, they got drunk together, they ate together. They saw each other as the same people with the same problems and common interests and common enemies. And so what begins to happen after Bacon's Rebellion is that previous laws that were on the books that were largely ignored, that differentiated race, would be now enforced. And other laws that would differentiate race would be introduced and enforced. And so it becomes illegal for white and black people to marry. It becomes illegal, even in common law. It had always been considered illegal, but even in common law, it would become illegal. It would be illegal to have children together. It would be illegal for white and black people to live together. Separate punishments would be enforced. So if a white person was to run away as an indentured servant, he might just get 1 or 2 years. If a black indentured servant or slave was to run away, he would become a slave for life. This is still when slavery is in transition here, and you have people aren't clear how long should a person be a slave. Well, by the time 1676 rolls around, it becomes quite clear who is going to be a slave and how long they're going to be a slave. To be a slave means to be black, and to be a slave means to be a slave for life. At first, these laws would have been resented by the lower classes of people, but give it another generation, by the 1700s, by the time you get to the early 1700s, both poor, middle class, and rich English people, white people, now we can begin using that term, white people, by the time we get to the 1700s, understand themselves to be biologically superior.
Now, do you understand why they want to hide history? Do you not understand why they want to hide so much? See, this is when you thought understand, particularly white America and your hanger-ons.
Beating up for drugs.
And your hanger-ons who want desperately to have proximity to whiteness. This is why they don't want you to know history. Because black history is quintessentially American history. It is white history. And there's things they don't want you to know because they don't want you to know how things got this way. Why it got this way. How no Africans truly became slaves for perpetuity. See, this is the thing that many of you who scream about reparations fail to understand. Let me explain to you some brief economics. Remittance is where money leaves the country. It goes outside of the country's socio-economic cycle. It is never recovered. In other words, thing happening with the money in Ukraine right now. That money will never come back. It will never be, in any way, there will be no goods or services coming from Ukraine. So that money is lost forever. The same with migrants working. They send part of their money home to their families. Same thing. That money is lost forever. Now, with reparations, that money goes back into the economic cycle of the country. Because bills have to be paid, food has to be bought, mortgages can be paid off, car notes can be paid off, so forth, so on. So that money never leaves the country, it's never lost. It just simply goes through the economic cycle and actually boosts the economy. And any inflation that's occurred is because these rich white people who were responsible for slavery in the first place decided that there should be inflation. See, you were never a Christian nation, America. You never were. You had the potential to be one. In fact, at the beginning of Bacon's Rebellion, you see that you more than had the potential to be a true Christian nation. Instead, you chose to be the opposite of Christian. Instead, you chose to be a wicked nation, a harmful nation, a rebellious to God nation. So, as I said, and I would do a part 5 as well, about why America was never a Christian nation. So even your desire to not pay back reparations, remember what the white guy said? You reap what you sow. He's absolutely right. Because when you watch the cycle of revolutions of countries, when they rise and fall, guess who always ends up paying the price in the end? It's always the person that created the shit in the first place. Or say, it's always the person who started the shit, who started shit in the first place. So yeah, and even in the Bible it says there will be some horrible things happening to Americans particularly to white Americans. I wonder